We've discussed bureaucracies, we've discussed policymakers, we've discussed how presiding officers can help bureaucracies. What does a bureaucracy need to be successful? What do they need to be able to accomplish the goal, the mission they are given from the state legislature? The first thing the bureaucracy needs is simply public support. We need the public to buy into their mission, to believe in what they are doing. Why does the bureaucracy do this? Or need this, rather? Well, what happens if the public thinks that the bureaucracy is not doing a good job, or they are not being effective, they are not needed? Well, they may contact their state representatives, their state senators, their state house members, and say something along the extent of, why do we have this agency? This is a waste of money. They are not doing what is intended, or they're old, they're obsolete. There's no need for them. Well, if enough people call, and our state legislators might say, you know what? You're right. We don't need this bureaucracy. They're not doing what is required. They're not meeting the minimum requirements. So they cut their funding and they abolish the agency. So for bureaucracy to flourish, they really do need public support. The next thing the bureaucracy needs to be effective is they need expertise. And this is simply, they need people who are able to take an idea and its conception. They are to promote it to all, get people to buy in. And then they are charged with enacting this policy, enacting this idea. They are charged, they're responsible for bringing it to fruition. Actually writing the wording that's going to create this law. And we'll go over that in a second. The last thing a bureaucracy needs is the ability to gather information. And these agencies need to be able to gain information to determine what laws are wanted or what laws are even needed. With this information, they can gather this information, they can pass it on to the state legislators or other elected or appointed officials. Why would this information be appointed to or be important to the legislators? So this way, they know what the people want, what their constituents want. The bureaucracy gathers this information, passes it on to our elected officials or appointed officials, and this allows these policymakers to better serve us. So the ability to gather information is also very important to a bureaucracy. Administration of the law. When legislators write laws, are the laws clear and concise, or are they just a jumbled mess? Are they just a general idea? Most of the time, laws are jumbled. The legislators have a general idea of what the law is supposed to do, what they want the law to do, what word do I want? To accomplish. But they really have no idea how to implement it. So this is going to lead us to two things. The first thing this leads us to is administrative review. And what this means is that administrators study and interpret the law so that they can write the rules and regulation to implement the law's enforcement. What we're going to have is going to have an administrative review. We're going to have an administrator look at this law and say, okay, this is my interpretation. I think this is what the legislative body wants. This is my belief. This is how I interpret this law. All laws undergo administrative review. The second part of this is creating or is writing the administrative law. And the administrative law is simply the rules and regulations written by administrators to administer, to bring about a law, to put it into effect. The effectiveness of a law is often determined by how administrative law is written. And I'll give you an example here. The Texas legislature looks around and says, you know what? Texas is a rich state. We have money. There is no reason that we should have hunger in the state of Texas. So the Texas legislature passes a law to make sure nobody goes hungry. Okay. Clear and concise or nice and jumbled farce. Nobody goes hungry. Well, we get the idea, but we're not really sure how to implement it. Administrative review. Clear enough, the legislature doesn't want people to go hungry. But how are we going to implement this law? And this is where that well-written administrative law comes in. So we understand administrative review. We understand the goal of the law is to make sure that nobody in Texas goes hungry. But how do we do this? Where do we even start? Because there's a number of things we could start off with. Well, let's start off with who qualifies. Because, are we going to try and feed millionaires? Are we going to try and feed people who make over $100,000 a year? So we need to set some sort of process. We need to set some base level. Okay, our base level is what? People who make $20,000 a year and less qualify for this law. Okay. Is this an individual? Is this a family of four? What? We need to get a little bit more specific. Well, let's say $20,000 a year for an individual, because if I remember correctly, that is below the poverty line, or less than $42,000 a year for a family of four. That's below the federal poverty line. Okay. See, we're getting somewhere. We're writing this administrative law. Family of four, huh? Yeah, family of four. Mother, father, 2 kids. Okay. Do we need anything else on here? Say, do we need an age of the kids? Do we need parents in their 60s that still have 30-year-olds living at home because they're too lazy to go out and get a job? No, I don't think this is a type of people that this program was aimed at. But this is what we're going to have to write the administrative law for. We're going to have to clarify to make the law more effective, to make it be as good as it possibly can. How are they going to get this money? How are we going to provide food for them? Are we going to give them cash? Are we going to give them food? Are we going to give them something like the Lone Star card like we have now? What does it apply to? Can you buy beer? Can you buy cigarettes? Can you buy candy? These are all things that have to be taken into account when we're writing this administrative law. That's why I said the greater detail in the administrative law, the more effective the overall law is going to be. Accountability. At the beginning of this lecture, I told you that there was no individual that had accountability. There was nobody that oversaw all the bureaucratic agencies, all the bureaucracies in Texas. That does not mean that there is not some type of accountability. The first type of accountability I want to discuss is something called elective accountability. Elective accountability is the obligation of elected officials to be directly answerable to the voters for their actions. This means that we expect our elected officials to be in charge of and to be responsible for these bureaucracies, these agencies. Is this reasonable? Kind of. And I say that because the problem with this type of accountability is that most people do not know which elected official is responsible for the bureaucracy. And when we're talking about elected officials, we're talking the controller, the insurance commission, or not the insurance commissioner, excuse me, the land commissioner, these people, the controller, these people. The attorney general, that's the one I was looking for. I said controller twice. We don't exactly know what each elected official oversees. So elective accountability doesn't really work for us. Well, so the next type of accountability is legislative accountability. The legislature attempts to have some accountability of bureaucracy by establishing auditing, budgeting, and oversight boards so that they do go behind these agencies and check and see what they're doing. Well, this works, right? Well, yes, but there's a problem here also. What problem is that? How many bureaucracies, how many agencies are there? Remember, I told you there's over 220 agencies. How many days does our legislature meet? 140 days for every 2 years. Can we realistically expect our legislative body to provide oversight for 220 agencies, or 220 plus agencies, when they only meet for 140 days? The answer to that is no, they can't really do it. So legislative accountability exists, but once again, it's not that great. Well, what about accountability to the chief executive? Accountability to the governor? To have accountability to the chief executive, once again, this is going to be a failure. How come? We'll go back to this elective accountability. We see that these elected policymakers, the attorney general, the controller, they are elected by the people. Does the governor have any authority over them? Can he dictate to them what they will or will not do? No. So if he can't dictate to the policymakers what they're going to do, the chief executive has no real authority over that agency. For accountability to the chief executive to work, we would need a unitary executive, not this plural executive. We would need something that we see at the federal level, the president and his cabinet, where the president gets to pick the cabinet head secretaries. With the chief executive, with the governor not having this power, with the people electing these other policymakers, accountability to the chief executive does not exist because he cannot force these bureaucracies to do what he wants them to do. So once again, accountability to the chief executive, well, it exists, kind of, but it's not really good. So that leaves us with bureaucratic accountability. In all reality, the administrators are really accountable to the interest groups that benefit from the service programs that the administrators provide. What I mean is that the bureaucracy is actually only accountable to these clientele groups that they serve. Is this good? Unfortunately, there's a problem with this too. There's these four types of accountability, but none is better than the other. They're all basically pretty bad. Under bureaucratic accountability, Our bureaucrats will make laws to serve these clientele interest groups, and the clientele interest groups will go back and tell the state legislators, oh, these agencies are doing a wonderful job. But who are the bureaucrats concerned with? Are they concerned with the agencies? Are they concerned with us, the constituency, the people of Texas? Or are they concerned about themselves? What we will see is that these administrators, these bureaucrats, will often make laws favorable to their clientele groups. And they do this more than the reason that this is what they're hired to do. They do this with the future in mind. We see that a number of people only want to work in the public sector for a few years. After they make contacts, they will go work in the private sector. So remember I was talking about our presiding officers and what controls them. And we talked about their future goals. Well, it's the same way for bureaucrats. They will create laws favoring these clientele groups at the expense of ordinary everyday people in Texas because they expect to be rewarded. After a while, they expect to leave their bureaucratic job and go work for these agencies that they aided. So there's 4 types of accountability. They're all pretty bad. So how can we make administrators accountable to the public? Well, we looked at those 4 other levels of accountability, and remember, none of those were to the public. Well, there is a way that we can do this. The first way is that in Texas we see that we have something called open meeting laws. And what this means is that when an agency has a meeting, it must be open to public view. The public must be made aware that the agency is going to host a meeting, and most of it must be open for public consumption, for public view. We get to go watch. There are a handful of exceptions here. The exceptions would be if the meeting or the portion of the meeting is going to deal with personnel, land acquisition, litigation matters. These portions of the meeting are still allowed to be closed, are allowed to be secret, but every other portion of the meeting must be open to the public so we can go observe and see what our bureaucracies, what our administrators are doing. The second way that we can make administrators accountable to the public are through something called open record laws. And the media loves to do open records requests. What happens is any written form of communication is available to open records request. So we will see the media go through, and if they're investigating something, they will file an open records request. They want to see what was discussed in the minutes of the meeting. They want to see any notes that were written down in regards to the meeting. They want to see who voted how. So this is very powerful. The media uses this as a tool to dig up information. Another way to make administrators accountable to the public is Texas has passed what is known as the Whistleblowers Act. And what this means is that government employees who expose corruption, incompetence, or even criminal acts by other government employees, if they report these activities, they cannot be punished. They cannot be retaliated against for reporting this illegal activity. The law makes sense. It protects people. It encourages them to report illegal, immoral acts. Does it work the way it's intended? I don't think so. And why would this be? And my fear here would be is if today I report an illegal activity, that results in the agency looking bad. Tomorrow my boss comes up and says, Mr. Smith, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go. We've reviewed your performance and you're just not up to snuff. You're not up to par. And now, is it just a coincidence that I am being terminated the day after I blew the whistle on an illegal activity or immoral activity? Well, it could be a coincidence, but I doubt it. That's the problem with the Whistleblowers Act, is that we can't be retaliated against for reporting these activities, but that doesn't mean we can't be terminated for some other made-up reason. Finally, we have an office of the Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman is an official who hears complaints of employees and citizens concerning government administrators or policy administration. Now, the Ombudsman has no official power. They cannot force the administrative body to change. However, their purpose is to bring the complaint to the proper authorities so that it is addressed. Governor Ann Richards was so impressed with this idea of the Ombudsman that she actually created an office of the Ombudsman and put it in her cabinet. She put it in the governor's mansion. So this was the first governor to ever embrace this idea. A lot of the discussion about bureaucracies at both the federal and state level is that they're wasteful, they're time-consuming. Are they effective? So we will see a number of questions regarding bureaucracies. Well, there's a couple of things I want to go over so that first off, you can recognize a bureaucracy, and then we'll talk about this idea of waste and inefficiency. So the first thing that we want to discuss is how to recognize a bureaucracy. First thing we're looking for is size. In regards to a bureaucracy, yes, size matters. In a 3-person office, is there much bureaucracy? No. The boss makes the decision, the person underneath it implements it. But how many people, and this is why I was trying to kind of give you numbers. If you think back to the Attorney General's office, I said they employed over 4,150 people. Their responsibilities are so large and they need so many people to fulfill these responsibilities. So size in regards to the number of people working for an agency is important. Usually, the bigger the size, this is an indication of a bureaucracy. This does not mean that there's a minimum size for a bureaucracy. It does not mean there's a maximum size for a bureaucracy. But when you see an agency that is big, chances are good that this is going to be a bureaucracy. When we're trying to decide if something is a bureaucracy, we need to look at neutrality. And neutrality can have 2 different definitions when we're talking about a bureaucracy. The first definition of neutrality is simply, is everybody being serviced equally? What I mean by this is anybody being discriminated against? Is this law or regulation being administered, or are the benefits being given regardless of race, religion, creed, whatnot? Or are people not receiving benefits based on something? So a bureaucracy needs to be neutral. Everybody who qualifies needs to receive these benefits. The second definition of neutrality is going to be in regards to hiring. And what I mean by this is Do you have to know somebody to get hired? Do you have to know somebody already working there? Or is it equal opportunity? Is it equal employment opportunity for everybody? You don't have to know a particular person. What happened was, under President Jackson, we saw something occur that was called patronage. The patronage system, our elected officials would award their supporters, or they would reward their supporters with government jobs for supporting them. The problem here is they're going to give you a job in a particular government agency, and you might not have the first clue of what this agency does or how to do it properly. How is this going to affect the agency and how it operates? Are they going to be effective? Now, the answer is no, they're not. So, in regards to this patronage system, we saw our bureaucracies, the U.S. government, they created something called the civil service, or the merit system. And in the civil service, or the merit system, all this does is that potential employees are tested as part of the hiring process. This is usually going to be the initial process, and we're going to establish, do you have a base knowledge to do the job? This way, this eliminates the patronage system that you're just giving it to somebody. If they don't know anything, the agency can say they don't have the base knowledge. They are not qualified for this job because everybody has to take and pass this test. So we see the civil service, or the merit system, created to try to promote equality in hiring. Everybody is going to have a base knowledge so that they can do the job effectively. Bureaucracies have a hierarchy. This means they have a chain of command, or an organization chart. We know who the president is, the vice president, the COO, the chief financial officer, the CFO. We can see who is in charge of what. This is their hierarchy, their chain of command. Bureaucracies should also have expertise. And what we mean by this is that bureaucracies should be able to understand, when they make their decisions, who are they going to affect? How are they going to affect them? Expertise means that these bureaucracies are going to take all of this information into account. And there's a final question, and I mentioned this at the start of this slide. When we see bureaucracy, we tend to think of governmental waste, government abuse. There is a question about, should we privatize a bureaucracy? Every 4 years we have somebody running for president, and they say, I'm going to privatize government. I'm going to make it leaner. I'm going to make it more efficient. Should this happen? Like anything else, there's pros and cons. If you privatize an agency, the agency is probably going to have more money. Private companies have more money than public agencies. The agency has a set budget. Private agency can extend or expand. They can go past this budget. So the agency will have more money. However, under privatization, not only will they have more money, but a private company can react more quickly to issues. They can react more quickly to problems. They don't have to wait for Congress to exercise their oversight. They can see a problem and they can fix it right then, right there. So yeah, there's a couple of reasons that we should privatize. So there are reasons to privatize. Private agencies can react faster. They can fund it better. They're actually more innovative. They cut waste. However, there are also cons against privatization. There are reasons we shouldn't do this. First off, there's goals. And what is the goal of a private business? Well, the goal of a private business should be to make money, to make a profit. What is the goal of a public agency? It's not to make a profit. The goal of a public agency is to help as many people possible given the resources that they have. So if we privatize, we lose some control. We cannot dictate to these private agencies how they're going to do something or how they're going to accomplish it, because all these private agencies are saying is, we're going to accomplish it. So we lose that authority. How do we know that the private agency won't cut corners to increase their profit margin? So privatization, yay or nay, that's going to be, once again, a personal opinion. There's pros and cons for both of them.